Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks for coming with us on this journey through the news and life and I don't know what else.
And a snowy Washington, D.C. this morning as well.
That's snowy Washington, D.C.
A journey all of itself. But in any event, lots of news. So what is on your radar, Robby?
We'll get right to it. President Donald Trump is apparently serious about his plans for the U.S. to take control of the Gaza Strip. He met with King Abdullah of Jordan on Tuesday to discuss his plans to evacuate some Palestinians from the war-torn stretch of land, which has been reduced to rubble in the wake of Israel's war on Hamas. Here is what Trump said.
Taxpayer dollars won't be used for this. So what money are you going to use to buy Gaza?
We're not going to buy anything. We're going to have it, and we're going to keep it, and we're going to make sure that there's going to be peace, and there's not going to be any problem, and nobody's going to question it. And we're going to run it very properly, and eventually we'll have economic development at a very large scale, maybe the largest scale on that site. And we'll have lots of good things built there, including hotels and office buildings and housing and other things. And we'll make that site into what it should be. And you have some good people and some bad people, and you may have hostages right now. And you know, I have a Saturday deadline, and I don't think they're going to make the deadline personally. I think they want to play tough guy, but we'll see how tough they are. But it's going to be a wonderful thing. It's going to be wonderful for the Middle East.
Look, peace in the Middle East is a wonderful notion. It's also an elusive one. The Israelis and the Palestinians are fighting because they have very different ideas on how to achieve that peace and even what they consider peace. Now, is it really America first to say that the U.S. should come in and adjudicate this dispute? Haven't the American people had enough of that? Now, Trump, to his credit, has previously recognized that the bipartisan foreign policy establishment, which is reflexively hawkish and neoconservative, has failed to deliver peace and promote America's interests abroad. He pushed Israel to make a deal to return the hostages and end the fighting with Hamas, which has already resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent Palestinians. This was a massive accomplishment, something Biden couldn't get done because Netanyahu didn't respect Joe Biden. Any plan, however, to put the U.S. at the center of Gaza's future is ill-conceived. Now, if the Palestinians are ready to reject Hamas and want to employ American companies to rebuild the area for their economic benefit and ours, in an ideal world, look, that would be just fine. That's one matter. But forcibly displacing the Palestinians into other countries that don't want them, well, that's quite another. Jordan is an important Middle Eastern ally. They don't want to take the bulk of the Palestinians. King Abdullah agreed to take a small number of child refugees. That's very kind of him, but it's quite different. We'd risk destabilizing his country if we pushed all the Palestinians into Jordan. Do we really want to do that? Of course not. Now, look, I can understand the appeal of splitting up the Palestinians and incorporating them into Egypt, Saudi Arabia, etc. Those countries don't want to do that either. The Palestinians don't want to do that. Many of them continue to want their own Palestinian state. Others want to continue fighting Israel in this doomed crusade forever. None of these are great options, and given that none of them are great options, shouldn't the U.S. just remove itself from the equation? Why does it have to be our business? Earlier this week, I hailed Elon Musk for suggesting that the U.S. should finally audit the Fed in accordance with the dreams of former Republican Congressman Ron Paul, a libertarian icon. Well, Paul also has some advice for Trump about Gaza, namely, let's stay out of it. Let's watch.
In fact, polls show that the majority of Americans oppose providing military aid to Israel or other countries. One of the best comments was made by libertarian scholar and podcaster Tom Woods. He suggested that Trump-Gaza's proposal is the type of wasteful overseas spending that DOGE should be working to eliminate. Trump's plan has also been criticized by the government of Saudi Arabia. This could mean that if President Trump follows through with this proposal, it will further push Saudi Arabia away from the United States and toward the BRIC alliance.
Similarly, former Congressman Paul's son, Senator Rand Paul, criticized Secretary of State Marco Rubio for backing just such a plan to make Gaza beautiful again. That's how Rubio described it. Again, that sounds nice in theory, but if it's accomplished with American military might over the objections of the people who live there, it's going to cause chaos. Rand Paul said, quote, "The pursuit for peace should be that of the Israelis and the Palestinians. I thought we voted for America first We have no business contemplating yet another occupation to doom our treasure and spill our soldiers' blood. Amen to that. Listen to the Paul family, Donald Trump. They know what they're talking about.
So this is an interesting one, Robbie, because it's one of these instances where you and I arrive, I think, at basically the same destination from different routes. Your view, as you just laid out there, is to do with the cost to the American taxpayer and the general enmeshing of America in foreign affairs. In relation to Trump's proposal on Gaza, I think it is the definition of ethnic cleansing. He has said that he wants to remove all the Palestinians from Gaza. To forcibly move a block of people from their homeland to somewhere else is clearly ethnic cleansing in my view, and in the view of many other people who know a lot about international law. So I think it would be unjust. I think it would be also just a quagmire that the United States would be drawn into. The Palestinians en masse are not going to agree to abandon Gaza, having previously endured an enormous assault by Israel for 15 months. And I think it would be interesting to see whether Ron Paul's kind of idea of cutting off military aid to Israel would have any chance of coming to fruition. He's right that it's fairly unpopular. There was a study done by Brown University that the Biden administration had supplied $18 billion in arms in the year after Hamas's attacks of October 7th, which we have always said are terrible and were heinous and all the rest of it. So, I mean, if Ron Paul and Rand Paul and you are coming into that position from albeit a slightly different perspective, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I'll tackle it from any perspective that is likely to actually result in the policy I want. Elon Musk, DOGE, they're looking for areas of the government to cut. Let's consider, we just went through USAID and all these kinds of foreign payments that I argue about, and I don't like a lot of them, and maybe you like some of them, and
sure.
would look askance at some others. But let's count this. This is a massive foreign expenditure, the money we give to Israel and other nations, and is this really promoting our own safety? In terms of the ethnic cleansing, I'm not at all dismissing the arguments that this would be unjust. I don't know exactly what term would be the right way to apply it. I don't want to displace anyone over the globe from where they live by force of our military. That's just bad and wrong. The issue with the Palestinians, I also don't think the Palestinians are a monolith. Probably is a variety of views among them. We read a little bit of polling to try to understand their, if what most of them want is just permanent war with Israel in order to regain their homes that are in the Israeli state, I don't think that's whether it's legitimate or not, it's not a reasonable objective. It's not an objective that is likely to come to fruition. So I can see a world where other people decide what would be better for them, but if they don't want that, then it's never going to work. If some of the Palestinians do want to reject terrorism and engage in economic projects with the West or with their neighbors, again, then they shouldn't have to leave at all. It should just be they should participate in the rebuilding. That's not going to happen as long as Hamas remains the de facto controller of the region. But
well, yeah, but you see, here's where I come down on that point. In relation to the whole, they have to reject Hamas and all of that. Armed groups exist or thrive whenever a peaceful means of addressing legitimate grievances doesn't exist. And so Mr. Netanyahu, for example, has repeatedly said he is against a two-state solution. There have been repeated, people talk about, this conflict or this phase of the conflict began on October 7th. Over in the West Bank, it was the deadliest year for Palestinians before October 7th in 2023. So what you term terrorism, or what other people would term armed struggle, emerges from legitimate grievances that cannot be advanced in a peaceful way. Now, then there's a whole separate question about the 1948 borders versus the 1967 borders, and all of that debate. I'm not sure what the polling suggests one way or another about exactly how many Palestinians want to, as it were, wipe out Israel and how many would be amenable to a two-state solution. But the point is that I think that it's up to the Palestinian people who should lead them.
Yeah, well, I don't think it should be up to us because I don't think we have a clue for how to make it a better situation. And so hands off would be the strategy I would recommend, as would the Pauls. Donald Trump should listen. Coming up next, is the nation facing a constitutional crisis? That's the debate we'll discuss.
So in my view, I think he's
causing a constitutional crisis intentionally so that this goes to the Supreme Court.
Some legal experts say our country could be headed toward a constitutional crisis as the president pushes the boundaries of his powers.
Certainly, we are seeing a lot of critics of this White House suggest that they are on the cusp of a constitutional crisis.
Mark, other administrations have clashed with courts before. So how do you see it? Is this a constitutional crisis, or is it just heightened friction between these two branches?
If you've been following the news lately, you've probably heard someone utter the phrase constitutional crisis quite a bit.
The New York Times published a report earlier this week where legal scholars sounded the alarm on Trump's actions. In that report, which was titled "Trump's Actions Have Created a Constitutional Crisis," scholars say, University of California, Berkeley's Dean Erwin Chemerinsky told the Times, "We are in the midst of a constitutional crisis right now. There have been so many unconstitutional and illegal actions in the first 18 days of the Trump presidency," he added. "We never have seen anything like this." Chemerinsky told the Times that revoking birthright citizenship, freezing federal spending, firing agency heads, shutting down agencies, and firing certain government employees all constitute lawless conduct. Rhode Island federal judge John McConnell issued a ruling Monday saying that the Trump administration had ignored his order to unfreeze federal funding. He said, quote, "The states have presented evidence in this motion that the defendants in some cases have continued to improperly freeze federal funding and refuse to resume disbursement of appropriated federal funds. The broad, categorical and sweeping freeze of federal funds is, as the court found, likely unconstitutional and has caused and continues to cause irreparable harm."
FCC records show McConnell had donated hundreds of thousands to Democratic PACs and campaigns when he was a private practice attorney. His last donation, however, was in March 2009. Now, White House spokesperson Harrison Field said of the ruling, each executive order will hold up in court because every action of the Trump-Vance administration is completely lawful. Any legal challenge against it is nothing more than an attempt to undermine the will of the American people.
Trump did say yesterday that he would abide by any court rulings.
And here's MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos yesterday writing a warning against prematurely using the words constitutional crisis.
I think we need to be careful with the term constitutional crisis because as I define it, that would be a situation where the Constitution doesn't have an answer and there is a pressing conflict. The flurry of executive orders, the chaos, that I think doesn't get us to crisis yet. It is irritating for the courts. It is challenging. It could lead to a serious problem if, as you said, they become too congested with dealing with these orders.
They keep coming.
The crisis occurs, and we've already talked about it, at the moment when there is a court order and the president or the administration refuses to follow it. Because historically, we don't really have a clear answer for what to do in that situation.
Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor spoke with Knight Foundation CEO Maribel Perez Wadsworth yesterday, where she made some telling remarks. Here she is.
The woman who asked Franklin, she said, "Do we have a monarchy or something else?" And his response was a republic. Our founders were hell-bent on ensuring that we didn't have a monarchy. And the first way they thought of that was to give Congress the power of the purse.
Now, Vice President J.D. Vance has jumped into this conversation, writing on X, quote, "If a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the Attorney General in how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that would also be illegal. Judges are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power." The right-leaning Article 3 Project founder Mike Davis wrote, in part, "The President of the United States has all federal executive power under Article 2 of the Constitution. Courts can stop him if he tries to steal power from other branches like Biden did with student loan forgiveness, but activist judges stopping the president from exercising executive power, like auditing Treasury payments or recalling Foreign Service officers, is a radical, dangerous, and unacceptable assault on the Constitution."
Lincoln Project founder Rick Wilson wrote on Blue Sky, "If you're wondering if you're in a constitutional crisis and that the Republic could collapse at any moment, you are."
Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro wrote on X, "Democrats, your messaging didn't work when it was threat to democracy. Branding it constitutional crisis ain't gonna cut it." Constitutional crisis, Niall.
I think we might disagree on this one, Robby, but go ahead.
Might. But you must, surely you would concede that we have not gotten to the point where you're having high-level court decisions being made, for instance, by the Supreme Court, and having Trump say, as Andrew Jackson once did, the court made their decision, now let them enforce it. That was a constitutional crisis. We certainly have not gotten to that point, have we?
Well, we have gotten to the point where certainly at least one judge believes that the administration has ignored a lawful order regarding the freeze on the disbursement of federal funds, and that's why that judge said what he said and said that they had ignored this. To the point that we were discussing in the introduction about what J.D. Vance said, firstly, I think that does lay the ground for some kind of constitutional crisis, but also if, he should maybe seek a refund from Yale Law School or something, to suggest that it is unlawful for the courts to rule on a military operation. I mean, people who are American soldiers are still subject to law, and of course the criminal justice system can still act against them if they are acting outside of the law. Vance then went on to say this thing about that it is not for the courts. Courts are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. Well, if it's legitimate, obviously not. But the courts rule all the time on what is a legitimate or illegitimate use of executive power. And I think even you would acknowledge that it's very important that they do so.
Yes, in fact, I would like if the court would put more sharp limits on the executive powers and that Congress would actually do its job. And it is important, while Republicans control both houses of Congress, to do some lawmaking, do some legislating to back up the agenda that Trump and Musk are implementing. I've quoted Rand Paul quite a bit lately. He's saying a lot of things I agree with, as it happens to be the case. He tweeted yesterday or the day before that, like, look, this is all good. I'm happy about it, but we have to do rescission. These funds have been appropriated. You can't unwind that unless you send it back to Congress and Congress takes a vote to say, okay, yeah, we allocated this funding, but we don't actually want the executive to spend it anymore because we've decided it's pointless to do so. That happens prior. We can use that to cancel out some of that spending, but we actually have to do that because this spending already has been appropriated. I think of all the powers the federal government has, or the executive branch has, it makes sense that the executive has pretty broad discretion to to get rid of employees in the executive branch in these various agencies. Maybe if some of it is being done unlawfully, obviously that's going to work its way through the courts. And I, of course, think the Trump administration should have to listen to the courts. Look, I don't like the fact that the executive branch has gained so much power relative to the other two branches of government over the previous, 50 years or even more, going back to, I'm recalling FDR, who had that's probably the only thing like this we've ever seen, who had a dramatic number of laws and actions taken in his first 100 days to respond to the Great Depression. I was against a lot of that because that's, progressive governance. Now you're having the conservative or libertarian version of that, but it's important to do it through Congress, of course. But, Congress has, for instance, on foreign policy, Congress has given up its power over foreign policy to the executive branch slowly and then quickly, swiftly over the last however many years. I wish that had never happened, but it did happen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, yes, I do know what you mean. But the point here, I think, is that in these cases like the federal freeze, the underlying argument, which is a valid argument to have one way or another, has not been decided. And a judge in this instance has said, you can't continue to the Trump administration, you can't continue to do this while we decide the underlying case. And it appears to be the fact that the Trump administration has said, well, screw you, we're just going to go ahead and do it anyway. That obviously is, I think, lawless and very dangerous and an incursion onto the independence of the judiciary. And one more thing, Robby, because it gets to the point that you raised at the start. So a shout out to a reporter at Politico here, Ian Ward, who talks about
government-funded Politico.
Well, at least you stood up against that.
I did indeed disagree with MAGA people on that one.
So Ward talks about the fact that he did a profile in January 2023 of J.D. Vance, and he interviewed Vance. And during the interview, he referred to comments that Vance had made on a conservative podcast in 2021, which suggested, Vance suggested that is, that if Trump was re-elected, he should, quote, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat and every civil servant in the administrative state, and when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. And Ward writes, I asked Vance if this was still his view. Yup, he responded. So you do have a sitting Vice President of the United States espousing exactly the kind of view that you acknowledge is a constitutional crisis.
Yes, and I would remind J.D. Vance that there is, maybe he just enjoys the fight of it, but there's no reason to let it get to that because the Republicans have control of Congress. We can just pass a law to fire some of those, or to restructure the federal bureaucracy and eliminate DEI or mid-level bureaucracy or whatever you want to do. You can do that. You control Congress. If the Democrats try to stand in your way, then you can go before the American people and say, we are trying to reduce the size of government for the first time ever, and here are all the Democrats who are blocking us. But they haven't, at least they haven't even let it get to that because they're doing it via executive order. So, like you, I would like to do it lawfully, of course,
We would
so
like
that
to
there's no
uphold
crisis.
We're pro the rule of law here.
Up next, the battle for ChatGPT and the soul of AI. It's a battle between two people, Sam Altman and Elon Musk. We'll talk about it. Clash of the Titans, the tech titans, that is. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman speaking out after Elon Musk offered $97 billion to buy Altman's company.
Here's Altman yesterday on Bloomberg.
I mean, look, OpenAI is not for sale. The OpenAI mission is not for sale. Elon tries all sorts of things for a long time. This is this week's episode.
You take it seriously at all? What do you think he's trying to drive at with this?
I think he's probably just trying to slow us down. He obviously is a competitor. He's working hard and he's raised a lot of money for XAI, and they're trying to compete with us from a technological perspective, from getting the product into the market. And I wish he would just compete by building a better product, but I think there's been a lot of tactics, many, many lawsuits, all sorts of other crazy stuff. Now this.
Do you think Musk's approach then is from a position of insecurity about XAI?
Probably his whole life is from a position of insecurity. I feel for the guy.
You feel for him?
I do, actually. I don't think he's like a happy person. I do feel for him.
Okay. Do you worry that he has this proximity to the president and that he can influence the decision-making of the US presidency and policies around this agenda on AI?
Not particularly. Maybe I should, but not particularly. I mean, I try to just wake up and think about how we're going to make our technology better.
Okay.
Musk made the almost $100 billion offer with a group of investors this week.
Initially, Altman had responded to Musk's offer on X by writing, "No, thank you, but we will buy Twitter for $9.74 billion if you want." Musk then responded by calling the OpenAI head a swindler and scam Altman.
Musk co-founded OpenAI with Altman and a handful of others. The feud between the two started when Musk sued OpenAI in February 2024, long before the existence of DOGE. Musk alleged that OpenAI had abandoned its non-profit mission.
However, Musk dropped that lawsuit after the company published a blog that had some of his emails. Musk acknowledged in those emails that the company actually needed to make a lot of money to fund certain resources.
Then Musk sued OpenAI in August 2024. He accused the company of fast-tracking artificial general intelligence to maximize profits. Artificial general intelligence is the concept of a machine being able to match or surpass human cognitive capability across many tasks.
The founder of Railway, Jake Cooper, wrote on X, "The rap world has Drake versus Kendrick, the tech world has Elon versus Altman."
And ex-content creator Sawyer Merritt wrote, "Interesting, Elon's lawyer says that all of the money from Elon's and his group's $97.4 billion OpenAI buyout offer would be used exclusively to further OpenAI's original charitable mission, should OpenAI accept the offer." Now, Sam Altman said publicly he wasn't at OpenAI for the money and was doing it because he loves it. So essentially, Elon is putting Sam in a tough spot by pushing him to prove that what he said is actually true. And that's what's going on here, I suppose.
Yes.
So these are two men who've had a feud for a long time.
A contentious
it's a
relationship.
Professional
Yes.
and personal rivalry. That ex-commentator thought of Kendrick versus Drake. I thought of Tesla versus Edison, which is a tech feud from the late 1800s, a fascinating one in the current wars to come up with a better use of uses of electricity. These are two very smart people who are doing very interesting and exciting things and hate each other.
Yes.
And have sued, or at least Elon has sued Sam Altman. Sam Altman was ousted from the board of OpenAI briefly, I believe.
Right.
And then the employees all said they would resign unless he was brought back. And so then he was brought back. You know, it's kind of hard to parse. Neither of us are expert enough to quite parse what's going on here. Maybe we should get somebody on the show who knows the inner workings of these things a bit better than we do. However, you know, I personally don't begrudge if Sam Altman makes money inventing good artificial intelligence. I guess it's Elon doesn't like his that he portrays himself as this altruistic, charitable person when he's actually going to make gazillions from this if it's ever successful.
Right. But then when Elon left, he actually, of course, now has his own AI venture. So, I mean, there is, as Altman pointed out there, rivalry in a business sense as well as just personal animosity. Having said that, the personal animosity is far more amusing, I must say. I mean, particularly Altman saying that Elon's whole life is a reaction to insecurity or whatever exactly he said there. That was a pretty sharp dig.
It is,
I
but
imagine there'll be others coming back.
But I am amused by what he doesn't say. Like, then he was asked by that interviewer, well, Elon is like running the whole government. Are you worried that, you know, that's going to be bad for you? And then on that he said, no, not really. He's not joining into the Elon is causing a constitutional crisis, blah, blah, blah. Put me in with the resistance, because Sam Altman actually has a very combative relationship at the moment with progressive Democrats. I did a radar on this a couple weeks ago that Elizabeth Warren threatened him over his support or his personal donation to the Trump inaugural fund. So even though Sam Altman has a rivalry with Elon Musk, he does not want to be perceived as anti-Republicans or anti-Trump or throwing in with Democrats, which speaks to, you know, while there are going to be rivalries and there should be competition. It's a good thing for America, for tech innovation, that there's competition between these two very wealthy, quasi-eccentric innovators who are trying to come up with the best technology. Competition is good. It's how we win. It should be fair competition. I don't think Elon should use these levers of power he has to benefit his companies in some way. It should be fair and open competition, because a better technology will emerge, and then we will be able to beat China, which should be the main goal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the key point in all of that is that Elon should not be able to use the levers of power to advantage his own companies. We will debate that in more extensive fashion whenever we discuss his appearance in the Oval Office yesterday. But I mean, I'm not familiar with the minutiae of exactly why Elon Musk left OpenAI, other than it's this general sense that we've already discussed. But Altman just seems to me to be a more modulated, nuanced individual. I don't know exactly how his eccentricity presents itself, but like what he said in that interview seemed completely defensible to me. And as you say, he wasn't drawn into a reflexively, let's say everything damning I possibly can about Elon Musk. He has clear views. He talked about this being the latest episode of their feud, and that seems a reasonable comment to make at the least.
Maybe he might be a little bit more psychologically or
stable.
Neurologically stable. I mean, there has been reporting on Elon's alleged, I should always say alleged, recreational drug use and some other things, I think from the Wall Street Journal.
That's right. The Wall Street Journal did a really
alleged that he was a regular user of ketamine, and that may have impacted him. That's, again, according to, not me, according to reporting from, I believe, the Wall Street Journal or some other publication.
Sure. I mean, quite aside from that issue, I just think in terms of his persona, more so actually on X than in person, it's just very intemperate a lot of the time, and that's why I find him kind of tiresome in that particular format.
Coming up next, a new book out next month lays out the extent to which the Trump campaign was worried about Iran killing Trump. We'll speak to the author coming up next. Journalist Alex Isenstadt got unusual and exclusive access inside President Trump's campaign for re-election. In his new book, due out next month, Revenge, the inside story of Trump's return to power, Isenstadt takes readers deep into Mar-a-Lago, inside the courtroom, and aboard Trump Force One.
One of the items that stood out to Isenstadt was the depth of concern about an Iranian attack on Trump and how that threat impacted the candidate. Here with us now to discuss some of what he uncovered in regard to Iran and Trump is none other than Alex Isenstadt. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start off on that Iran topic. Why did Iran become such a key concern for Trump and the people around him?
Sure. So Iran has always been somewhat of a concern for Trump ever since he ordered the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani back before he left office in 2020. But things intensified over time, where to the point that towards the end of the 2024 campaign, the threat level from Iran was so intense that at one point, Trump was informed by law enforcement officials that Iran had agents in the United States with access to surface-to-air missiles that could be used to down his plane, Trump Force One.
And of course, Trump was actually the victim of an assassination attempt, got shot in the ear. Was there immediate speculation that that was perhaps Iranian linked because of the warnings the campaign received? Do you have any idea about that?
There was speculation initially, but law enforcement has never found any evidence to suggest that the Butler shooting was tied to Iran. And in addition, the foiled assassination plot against Trump in September at his golf course in West Palm Beach, there's never been any evidence to directly linking Iran to that either.
Alex, I just want to get back to what you mentioned there about surface-to-air missiles and the threat that they posed to the campaign jet, Trump Force One. In the book, I understand that you detail what was essentially the use of a decoy jet, or in fact that the real jet did not have now President Trump on board. Tell us a little bit about exactly what went on there and what it says about perhaps Trump's view of his staff.
Sure. So this is in fall during the home stretch of the campaign, and Trump had been informed of this threat, and the very high leaders of the campaign came up with a plan, which was to have Trump would secretly, covertly go into a private jet that was actually owned by Steve Witkoff, his friend, who's now the Mideast envoy in Trump's administration. He's playing a pretty key role in the administration. Trump would go on to Steve Witkoff's G6 Gulfstream jet. He would be joined by a very small group of aides, including Susie Wiles, who's the campaign manager and now White House Chief of Staff. And unbeknownst to many other Trump campaign officials, they would be going into Trump Force One themselves. And so when they got to Trump Force One, the campaign aides didn't realize that Trump wasn't going to be on it wasn't going to be on the flight until just before the doors closed. They saw that Trump was not in his usual seat, and that's when campaign leaders informed the campaign aides of what the plan was, that Trump wasn't on the jet, wasn't on Trump Force One, and that it was just a test for how things could be working moving forward. Of course, a lot of the campaign staffers were not too happy about this, understandably so. They felt like they could be bait in the event that the plane was shot down. The campaign leaders tried to assure them that that wasn't the case, but it was, by all accounts, a fairly surreal flight with a lot of gallows humor.
Very bizarre situation, I would think. I mean, they're on this plane, and I mean, whether they thought they were bait or not, they were effectively. I mean, if the campaign jet was a target and they were on it and Trump wasn't, that's pretty wild stuff, no?
Right, and it was a very intricate plan where a lot of these staffers, they actually got to Trump Force One in a motorcade, thinking that Trump was also in that motorcade. Unbeknownst to them, Trump had his own separate motorcade, which took him to Steve Witkoff's G6 plane. And so you had two separate motorcades, and these staffers didn't know until the plane was just about to take off that Trump was not with them.
Trump recently made some comments about Iranian leadership, referencing that if they were to take him out or take out some other senior official, that there are plans to retaliate, but that he doesn't want to have a combative relationship with the Iranian regime. Were those comments being taking into account what he learned and what the campaign learned over the last couple months from Iran's designs on him? And is this an ongoing problem that will be made worse or better depending on what his policy is?
Sure. Trump is well aware that Iran wants him dead. Trump has been aware of this for some time. he became increasingly aware of it by the end of the campaign. And he didn't talk about this incident specifically, but at certain points he did go on X and he did say that he'd gotten alarming information about Iran. And so that is definitely shading his thinking right now when he's asked questions about the threat that Iran poses to him, which is what happened last week. And so you can bet that this is something that is coloring how he's going to be dealing with Iran moving forward.
Alex, just getting off briefly the Iran topic, in terms of reporting the book and the access that you obtained, what else really stuck out in your mind? What was the sort of key things that surprised you or took you aback?
One of the things that really surprised me was how much of a different campaign and how much more functional of a campaign it was from the campaigns that Trump ran in the past. But also, Trump in a lot of ways, and you're seeing this as he goes into office, he's a changed figure in a lot of respects. He's not quite as manic as he used to be. He's a little bit more relaxed in some respects. He's more willing to listen to people around him, to take in advice. He's, in some ways, a little bit chastened. He has learned a lot from what went wrong in his first administration, and he's learning from that. And he learned from that to improve his to improve his 2024 campaign. And he's also in some ways learning from that as in his now second White House. Things are, by all accounts, a bit more functional. You're having fewer leaks. He's tolerating less dissent. And so you're just seeing a bit of a different environment in this White House. And you saw a very different environment in his campaign, in this campaign, than the ones you saw in 2016 and 2020.
How much of that has to do with the people he is surrounding himself with this time? It seems to me, last time he had his people, actually he had some of his family members making very key decisions, Jared Kushner and others, and then also a kind of Republican old guard still in a lot of the same positions that were lukewarm toward Trump at best, in some cases outright combative. Now it seems to me to be a lot of people who have gotten Trump's attention or gotten into Trump's orbit by being on the same page with him, even though there's tremendous ideological disagreements about policy among these people, but there aren't really disagreements with respect to Donald Trump himself.
That's exactly right. And one of the other things that I found is that for all the talk that Trump enjoys chaos, he actually has a lot less tolerance for it right now. And so that's one of the things he really likes about Susie Wiles, which is that she, of course, respects him. She has the respect of people around her who she's brought into the White House who are not fighting with each other. And so in the first White House, you had infighting between Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, Reince Priebus. Now you only have one White House. You have one centralized White House structure that is really people who are loyal and close to Susie Wiles, and Susie Wiles is loyal and close to Donald Trump, and she doesn't bring chaos into the fold, and Trump likes that. And so you're seeing a very different dynamic this time around.
Alex Isenstadt of Politico and the author of Revenge. Sounds a great book. Everyone should go and buy it immediately, but thanks for joining us on Rising.
Thank you.
Coming up next, one Michigan lawmaker's stance on reproductive rights. Stay with us. A Michigan state lawmaker is drawing considerable attention on social media. State Representative Laurie Pohutsky addressed a protesting crowd recently and said that she underwent an elective surgery to remove her reproductive organs. She was addressing the crowd's concerns over reproductive rights.
Pohutsky's statement received backlash from many on X. A Republican state representative, Brad Paquette, wrote, "Representative Laurie Pohutsky has been on a crusade to enable abortion of unborn babies up until birth since we entered the legislature together 6 years ago. She very well knows that President Trump cannot take away her ability to abort an unborn baby in Michigan. Publicly announcing the destruction of her reproductive system to further misinformation for political gain must be condemned by all." And former Newsmax reporter Brian J. Fail wrote on X, "Laurie, it's not so much men are unhappy with you. You took away your God-given gift over politics. Yes, politics. I'm much more sad than anything else and hope it doesn't become a trend for young women in America."
Pohutsky fired back, writing on X, "The fact that so many conservative men take personal offense to a decision that I made with my husband about my health care and future just proves the point that we shouldn't assume that right is secure. Here to weigh in is State Representative Laurie Pohutsky herself. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you all for having me.
Absolutely. So look, we touched on some of the controversy there at the start, which is about the politics of all of this. But you have spoken in other places about the fact that this decision that you made and the decision to talk publicly about it has elicited some very serious threats against you. So could you just sort of briefly recap the discussions you had leading up to making this decision, but also these threats that have been made against you in the aftermath?
Absolutely. This was a conversation my husband and I had been having for over a year. We had decided that we were done having kids. We were happy with where our family is currently, and had made that decision privately. After the election, we had begun talking about whether or not we wanted to explore a surgical option, and ultimately decided that we had concerns about the access of contraception and things like that, and decided to move forward with the surgery, frankly, with a little bit more urgency after the inauguration because of the executive orders that were coming out. And currently here in Michigan, we already have hospital systems that are preemptively ending various forms of care.
And then you made this speech to the crowd, and you outlined basically what you've just said there. And I mean, obviously the crowd was supportive of you. It was a crowd in favor of reproductive rights, but there was there's some legitimate or political criticism, which I think is fair enough in the give and take of things, but some other threats that aren't fair in the give and take of things and are threatening your safety. Is that correct?
Correct. My office has received some death threats. We forwarded them to law enforcement. I just frankly think it's a little silly that people are so exercised about a personal choice that I made that doesn't impact them, but it does sort of underline the overall attitude that some folks have around reproductive rights and bodily autonomy.
Sure. I mean, a private decision, of course. I think some of the conservatives criticizing you are suggesting it's a stunt because instead of keeping it a private decision, you've talked about it publicly and then linked it to the national debate over abortion. Now, President Trump has said that and many other Republicans have said there's going to be no national federal abortion policy, that it is to be left to states to determine. Every state that has so far weighed in on this issue is not crafting, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, if you think this is a possibility in Michigan. I'm actually originally from Michigan myself. I grew up in the Detroit area. Does not seem likely to me whatsoever that Michigan will suddenly craft overly restrictive abortion policies, but do you think that's a real possibility coming down the pipeline?
I do. I think anyone who trusts President Trump on what he said he will or won't do is perhaps being foolish. And frankly, it's not just about abortion policy. It's also about access to contraception and insurance coverage for contraception. There are absolutely states that are working to limit access to various forms of contraception. So I don't think that speaking publicly makes it inherently more or less political. It's about destigmatizing a decision that a lot of women are making right now, to the point that here in Michigan, you have to wait several months to even get a consultation. So I think that spreading awareness about that and also letting women who are considering this option know that they're not alone in that train of thought has been very validating based on some of the messages that I've gotten that are very supportive. And that was the point. It wasn't about politics, and anyone, including my colleagues, saying that this was done for political gains are being silly.
Was it a difficult decision to make it public? I mean, you mentioned in terms of the discussions with your husband about what to do, in terms of the surgery, that you guys had decided you were done having kids and all of that, but to talk about that publicly, even if you do believe strongly in the merits of destigmatizing such procedures, you must have known to some extent that you would be put in a very intimate area of your life, an intimate decision in the political firing line, I assume. Was that a difficult decision to make?
It was. There on one hand, it's no one's business but mine and my family's. On the other hand, I do think that there is value in having these conversations openly. And you're absolutely right. I did know that there would be some backlash, although to be fair, I didn't think it would be international news. So that was a little bit surprising, but to some extent, the backlash was expected.
The headlines about you having done this describe it as a kind of voluntary sterilization. What do you think of that characterization of the actions you took?
I mean, that's exactly the medical name for the surgery that I and countless women undergo every single year. It's essentially the same as tying people's tubes. That's how people colloquially used to refer to it. The procedure itself has changed a little bit. I think the term voluntary sterilization sort of causes people to panic or is objectionable for some reason, but that is in fact the name of the procedure that a lot of people are undergoing right now.
Just finally getting back.
Yeah, it's a harsh. I'm a libertarian. I don't care personally one way or the other. I don't have strong feelings on this issue, but there's something about calling it that does make me go, oh, why should a person? I mean, anyone can do whatever they want. Doesn't matter to me. But I don't know that it's described that way. It makes me icky about it. I don't know what else to say.
I'm a scientist. The actual nomenclature of things it's not something I get hung up on.
Fair enough. Well, State Representative Laurie Pohutsky, we appreciate you joining us on Rising, and an interesting conversation for sure.
Thank you both so much. I appreciate it.
So what happens when a journalist finds out that a federally funded organisation tries to conceal its DEI staff? More of that next.
DEI is in the administration's crosshairs. In fact, President Donald Trump did his best to relegate the concept to the dustbins of history. An executive order abolished DEI from any federally funded program, and that was issued on day one.
So when the publication The Free Press got a tip that PBS was trying to shift around its DEI staff, reporter Josh Code approached the broadcaster, which receives 15% of its funding from the federal government. That amount calculates out to $1.40 per taxpayer.
It is worth noting that the head of DEI, Cecilia Loving, earned an annual salary of $396,240 and introduced programs such as Meditation Mondays and Indigenous Healing Circles. How loving. There are also some questions as to whether the broadcaster broke the law by hiring people according to race.
Here with us now is Josh Code to reveal what he found when he queried PBS. Hey, Josh.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So just explain, I think one of the kernels of this story is the idea that you put questions to PBS about a tip that you had received that essentially they were going to reassign these two DEI executives to staffing services or something to that effect. They were going to put them in another department. And then shortly after your inquiry, it was announced that those two DEI executives were going to leave. Is that correct?
Yes, Niall, that's correct. What had happened was I got a tip from a high-ranking PBS executive, and this person told me that at PBS, DEI had basically run rampant because the CEO loved it and the employees loved it, and that in 2024 there was a round of layoffs where 24 people lost their jobs, but the DEI budget at PBS remained largely untouched. And so this person told me that these two execs were being reassigned to station services, and that, in effect, PBS was playing a dangerous game of chicken with Donald Trump. So when I went to their comms person, I asked if this was true, and a few hours later, he told me that the DEI department had been shut down and that these people would be leaving PBS. And I thought that this timing was curious because 10 minutes later, Paula Kerger, the CEO, sent an email to the whole staff saying that these two executives, Gina Leo and Cecilia Loving, were leaving PBS.
Does this show that, we've been dealing with this so far, just reclassifying employees who were in a DEI role, just calling them something else? Is that the norm right now in the federal government, do you think, unless they're specifically called out for doing so by outlets such as your own?
I think it is the norm, Robby, and I think we're going to see a lot more stories like this coming out across the federal government as different agencies prepare to be investigated by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. And I think that certain departments like Education and the Veterans Affairs Department, they've already placed a lot of staffers on paid leave, staffers who are concerned with DEI in their job descriptions. And that's the honest thing to do. And I think what remains to be seen is which other agencies will follow suit or which ones will only cave when the press comes to ask them questions.
Can you tell us more about what being a DEI employee at PBS actually entails? What was the actual work these two officials you paid attention to were doing for the organization?
Sure thing, Robby. You hit the nail on the head with the Indigenous Healing Circles and the Meditation Mondays. In effect, what these people were doing was coordinating mindfulness activities for staff and being basically PR representatives for the public to show the American people that PBS was sufficiently diverse. I think that what they did for their jobs day to day was less important than what they were able to put on their website, that these people of color were in high-ranking positions and that PBS was doing its job to advance diversity. And actually, all of this started in March of 2021 when PBS and CEO Paula Kerger received an open letter from over 100 documentary filmmakers. And in effect, what this letter said was PBS relies too much on Ken Burns and white male filmmakers, and they need to do better to hire Black and brown filmmakers. And Kerger publicly responded, saying in effect that these people were right, and this was a chance for PBS to do better. And they completely caved. They promised funding for diverse filmmakers. They hired these two executives who together were making over $500,000 a year. And this was all in the aftermath of George Floyd and the so-called racial reckoning. And the PBS DEI department themselves, they admit that George Floyd influenced their DEI policy. And I think they wanted to do the right thing. Whether or not they caved because of white guilt or because of fear of the mob, they still compromised the integrity of their newsroom. And I think the American people want answers about that.
Why is it caving, as you put it, rather than doing something that is actually useful or defensible at least? I mean, I noticed that in the article, for example, you refer, as we have here, to the Meditation Mondays. But I mean, there is actually quite a lot of study that suggests that meditation is a beneficial practice, and presumably nobody had a gun put to their head and was marched into Meditation Mondays. Another thing that you mention in your story is funding from the National Science Foundation to PBS, and you mentioned that that included $2.9 million for a kids' TV show to improve boys' and girls' perceptions of female scientists. What's wrong with that?
Well, Robby, I'm sorry, Niall, I think that it's very important to have diverse perspectives in a newsroom. And of course, it's important to have diversity. It's important to have wellness in a newsroom. But when you're a government-funded agency, there are other concerns that you need to address, which is, are people getting promoted based on race? Are people getting hired based on race? And I think that the question hanging in the air here is, did PBS break the law by hiring and promoting staffers based on race? And in 2023, they boasted, in fact, that a majority of their content and the people making it were from Black and Indigenous and people of color backgrounds. And so I think that this merits a congressional investigation, and whether or not people were highly encouraged or mandated to participate in Meditation Mondays should take a backseat to the fact that people are upset their tax dollars are being spent on these practices that erode meritocracy and erode equal opportunity.
Have you heard from any irate PBS employees that you've cost them their morning meditation circles by fixating on this?
I have not yet, but I hope that the people who left PBS can find other opportunities elsewhere to contribute in a meaningful way.
Josh Coe, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you both. Appreciate the opportunity.
Coming up next on Rising, Elon Musk was in the Oval Office yesterday. We'll tell you some of what he said and did. Stay tuned. Tech mogul Elon Musk made an appearance at the Oval Office yesterday.
Here's Musk defending DOGE's initiatives.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy.
Musk also discussed the painfully slow process of retiring and receiving benefits, revealing something interesting in the process.
This is actually, I think, a great anecdote because we're told the most number of people that could retire possibly in a month is 10,000. We're like, well, why is that? Well, because all the retirement paperwork is manual on paper. It's manually calculated, then written down on a piece of paper. Then it goes down a mine. And like, what do you mean a mine? Like, yeah, there's a limestone mine where we store all the retirement paperwork. The limiting factor is the speed at which the mine shaft elevator can move determines how many people can retire from the federal government. And the elevator breaks down sometimes, and then nobody can retire. Doesn't that sound crazy? There's like 1,000 people that work on this. So I think if we take those people and say, like, you know what, instead of working in a mine shaft and carrying manila envelopes to, boxes in a mine shaft, you could do practically anything else. And you would add to the goods and services of the United States in a more useful way.
Everybody listening was probably thinking, huh? But that limestone mine is real. Washington Post reporter David Fairholt wrote a piece about it in 2014 titled "A Sinkhole of Federal Bureaucracy in Pennsylvania." Fairholt wrote, during the past 30 years, administrations have spent more than $100 million trying to automate the old-fashioned process in the mine and make it run at the speed of computers. They couldn't. So now the mine continues to run at the speed of human fingers and feet. That failure imposes costs on federal retirees who have to wait months for their full benefit checks, and it has imposed costs on the taxpayer. The Obama administration has now made the mine run faster, but mainly by paying for more fingers and for more feet.
Here's what Morning Joe Scarborough had to say about Musk's initiatives this morning.
This is, I think, a concept that many Americans would support, a lot of independents would support. The question, though, is it being done legally? Is it being done constitutionally? And is it being done transparently? I think Elon Musk getting before reporters, I actually think as much as possible, since his people are running through these government agencies, I think that is extraordinarily important. And it's also, of course, most important that the letter of the law is followed, that the Constitution's followed, that actually Congress cares about its Article 1 powers.
The editor-at-large of The Bulwark, Bill Kristol, wrote on Blue Sky, prediction, Trump will never again let Musk take questions in the Oval Office. Editor-in-chief of Midas News, Ron Filipkowski, wrote, Trump babysitting Elon's kid, while Musk holds court with the press in the Oval Office.
Broadcaster Piers Morgan wrote on X, the media may mock this extraordinary Musk-Trump show from the Oval Office, but I suspect the way they're talking about how the U.S. federal government has been spaffing so much taxpayer money, will have many Americans cheering loudly. Yes, I agree with Piers Morgan, and I actually agreed with what Morning Joe had to say there for the most part. I thought it was a pretty successful press conference. I think the anti-Trump or never-Trump people are just like always seeing what they want to see. The mine anecdote, again, that's real. That's reporting from the Washington Post on the difficulty of retiring federal employees who want to retire because the process is not automated in any way. Maybe if you have too many federal employees down in this mine, they accidentally delve too deep and too greedily and awaken the Balrog to come up from the center. You don't know what I'm talking about.
I'm completely lost.
Well,
but
you viewers know what I'm talking about.
But I am pleased to see that we acknowledge that President Obama had speeded up the mine's workings during his time in office. Look, the mine thing, of course, it is kind of crazy, as Elon Musk said, and there's no disputing that. The thing that was unusual about the mine anecdote yesterday was it was one of the very few claims that was supported and verifiable, partly because of that Washington Post story. The rest of the time, we just had this kind of blizzard of claims with no substantiating evidence at all. Now, to be clear, I think it is likely, if not certain, that there is wasteful spending, fraudulent spending, and so forth in a government budget that runs to around $6 trillion. What I don't like is Elon Musk just sort of pontificating, throwing claims out. Then he says that, we're involved in maximal transparency, When you go to the official DOGE website, it has a grand total of 6 words written on it, with the exception of the title of the agency. The people voted for major reform. That's supposedly maximal transparency. I mean, it's a ludicrous claim to me.
Well, there should be more transparency, and everybody should, defend their assertions. But like the way the New York Times framed this, that Musk makes broad claims of federal fraud without proof. The proof does exist. Like there's
let's see it then.
Well, okay, that'd be like me saying or the headline: Robby Suave claims when you jump out of an airplane, you should wear a parachute without proof, because there's been no study on that. But I mean, we're bringing forward claims of
we acknowledge that
$50
the force
billion
of
in
gravity
Medicare
exists.
fraud, Pentagon losing funds, failing every audit. Like that's not an out there claim. That's not like a vaccines cause autism claim.
But that's not what he said, though. I mean, he would make all these other claims about, so we're paying Social Security for people who are 150 years old. Okay, perhaps we are. Can we see the evidence that we are? There's no evidence provided. He talks about, we put it on X. What he puts on X predominantly, or what DOGE puts on X predominantly, are claims. And so people have been pressing from various journalistic organizations to say, okay, let's see what the evidence is. Maybe he will provide it. Maybe he will. But that's different. The New York Times correctly says he's making these broad claims without providing evidence.
A lot of these, if I were to make a criticism, I would say that sometimes Elon Musk and the Doge people sound like they're the first people ever to have discovered some massive amount of waste and fraud that often has been reported in either conservative media, like the Limestone Mine, or just in the mainstream media. Like for all the negative criticisms I make of the mainstream media, that's mostly a criticism of the slant that comes through in a lot of the opinion content. A lot of times there's great reporting on the amount of waste, fraud, and abuse. I also, just to go back to the mine thing again, it's an example of the kind of thing that I think is the most affirmative and positive case for Elon Musk's vision of DOGE, which clashed a little bit with apparently Vivek Ramaswamy's vision in using DOGE as under the U.S. digital services to upgrade the infrastructure of government agencies to make them more modern, more efficient, to run better, more speedily, just as U.S. digital services initially came into existence to make the disastrous Obamacare website better, and that worked. They did make the website better. They could do that with the payment systems, with all these things. So it doesn't necessarily need to be ideological. We need to make it on a non-ideological basis. The processes of the government, we need to upgrade them to fit the 21st century.
Oh, I agree.
If that's what he's identifying and doing, that's great.
No, I agree with that. But is that what he's doing, and is that all of what he's doing? We were talking earlier on about the legal cases that suggest that his people have access to people's private financial information and that is unlawful by its nature. That will be determined by the courts. But the other thing is, he was asked about conflict of interest, which I've long thought is the single biggest and best argument against what he is doing.
Sure.
And he made this, in my mind, ridiculous argument that, if SpaceX, for example, has a contract, it's not me who's doing it, that's the people over at SpaceX. It's his company. He was the founder of it. He would obviously gain from gains for SpaceX.
Sure, I hear you on that, and I have consistently heard you out on this and said that I agree that there can be conflicts of interest, especially if he's deciding, who's getting contracts and grants and things. Well, a lot of it is his companies. Now, I would also point out that the sheer number of, he's a very wealthy and successful man with a lot of companies that that so many branches of the federal government have gone after for so many different reasons that, it can't be to some extent his fault that there's a conflict of interest that various regulators or political figures have him in their crosshairs, and so you say there's some kind of conflict of interest. Well,
no, but the
conflict
of interest is that the President of the United States is sending Elon Musk, he says, into the Department of Defense. Both you and I would like to see cuts
massive cuts
to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense is one of the main origins of these extremely lucrative contracts that his companies have. So therefore, there is an obvious conflict of interest on its face between the idea that this is some fair arbiter of where there is wasteful spending versus this man who is also in a position to gain from what the Department of Defense decides.
If there are examples that come out of something not being cut that should be cut because it's an Elon contract, we will definitely be criticizing it.
We'll be covering it extensively.
Next up, save those pennies for a rainy day? Not anymore. Bye-bye to the penny. We will discuss.
In for a penny, in for a pound. Well, it looks like President Trump is not, in fact, in for a penny. Over the weekend, he issued an executive order instructing the US Treasury to halt production of the 1-cent coin.
Trump wrote on Truth Social, "For far too long, the United States has minted pennies, which literally cost us more than 2 cents. This is so wasteful. I have instructed my Secretary of the U.S. Treasury to stop producing new pennies. Let's rip the waste out of our great nation's budget, even if it's a penny at a time." Right after President Trump's inauguration, DOGE wrote on X, "The penny costs over 3 cents to make and costs us taxpayers over $179 million in fiscal year 2023. The Mint produced over 4.5 billion pennies in 2023, around 40% of the 11.4 billion coins for circulation that were produced."
Back in 2013, then, President Barack Obama also expressed his support for axing pennies. Let's watch.
You know, we remember our piggy banks and, you know, counting up all our pennies and then taking them in and, you know, getting a dollar bill or a couple of dollars from them. And maybe that's the reason why people haven't gotten around to it. I will tell you that you're right. This is not going to be a huge savings for government, but anytime we're spending more money on something that people don't actually use, that's an example of something we should probably change. It's one of those things where I think people get attached emotionally to the way things have been.
The Democratic governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, backed Trump on X. As well as saving taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, there are major environmental benefits to eliminating the penny. This is a great move.
The U.S. Mint, in its 2024 annual report, said it lost $85.3 million on the production of nearly 3.2 billion pennies.
Americans for Common Sense, and that's cents with a T, which represents the interests of zinc producers and coin manufacturers, I didn't know such a body existed, said in a statement in late January, "The logical and fiscally responsible solution isn't to eliminate the penny, but to re-examine how the Mint allocates its overhead costs and focus on reducing the cost of producing nickels."
I disagree with that. It would require an act of Congress to fully discontinue the coin as Congress oversees the manufacturing of coin currency. Well, Niall, a penny for your thoughts. I am wildly in favor of eliminating
I thought you'd be a big fan of this.
Yes.
There seems to be bipartisan support. Good to see you on President Obama's side for once, Robby.
Yes, no, I agreed with everything he said there. You know, is it going to be the most government savings? No, but I hate when we derail things by saying, well, this is only whatever percent of the budget. Well, then we'll never cut anything because it's all only some percentage of the budget. Sure. It doesn't even seem like there are a lot of people in favor of using the penny still. There's so many arguments against it. It costs more to make it than it's worth. Nobody pays for things with pennies. Like, virtually no one ever pays for things with pennies. It just doesn't happen.
Did you notice that this was a rare example of Trump underestimating something rather than exaggerating it? He said that it costs more than 2 cents. But it actually costs more than 3 cents, which is unusual in itself. And I had not realized this, but our liberal cousins to the north, Canada, had abolished their penny, I think about 10 years ago. Now, I was curious.
I think Mexico did as well. A lot of other countries have.
May have done so. And so in Canada, the question is, well, what you do? You know, you obviously can't price something at $5.99 anymore. So they round it to the nearest 5 cents. And that's the problem solved.
Which is just fine. The 99 cents thing is just like annoying anyway. Are we really all fooled by that now? Still anymore? It was, I understand why it's a very innovative marketing gimmick, 60 years ago or something. Let's just use round numbers to pay for things. And then if we eliminated taxes, it just stays the round number. It'd be so nice.
Well, what about, I'm playing devil's advocate here just to irk you, what about people who are unbanked and may have like a store of pennies that they're about to use for important day-to-day?
I don't think there are any such. No, there are certainly people who are unbanked. I still don't think they're paying for things with pennies.
It's bags of pennies under their
so yeah, you can have bags and bags of pennies, and then you're like, oh, this is so much money, and it's $2.72. It just doesn't. People do not keep a lot of pennies to pay for things because it's just so wildly impractical. The heaviness of having a giant jar of pennies for what it's actually worth is not at all reasonable. One area where I thought maybe this is the case for pennies and that this would be impacted by it is charity. Because if you have extra cents, pennies, you just give them to charity because nobody wants to hold on to coins. But now, when you pay for things with a credit card, it asks if you want to round up for charity. That is such from what I'm just Googling this, is such a larger category of charity donations now as opposed to people giving. I mean, most people pay, the overwhelming majority of people are paying for things with cards, that kind of thing. Yeah. The coins are going the way of the dodo, and we gotta be with the times. And I actually can't believe this hasn't happened yet.
Well, also to your point about cards, I mean, I know personally people in my life who do not have bank accounts in the, with Chase or with Wells Fargo or whatever, who pay with stuff all the time, with Cash App or Venmo or whatever. So unbanked even as a term, I mean, I get why people have that term when you aren't opening a bank account in a major bank, but now there are a lot of alternatives to pay for things.
And it slows down the line at checkout if you're trying to get the old lady trying to get exact change.
Yes,
like,
but that happens.
We'll be here forever.
That happens both ways. People who are behind the line in the grocery store and they arrive at the checkout and then decide to start sorting through what they have cards for.
I hate that. Yeah. I want to pay for everything with card. I want to even improve that technology that I just have a chip embedded in my arm.
You don't mind, even if it's by Bill Gates or whatever, you'd be fine.
Not for Bill Gates, but if it's Elon,
you'd
my
be
buddy
cool.
Elon, that's great.
The Elon chip, you'd be all in favor.
Well, he already has access to all my information.
He does.
What are we
just as well we have Democratic attorneys protecting your privacy.
Most technological innovations, I don't like using QR codes. I join most people in hating QR codes. I want give me an actual physical menu. Don't make me scan a code to read what the menu is on my phone. I don't like having apps for everything either. Because I got new healthcare coverage, and I'm expecting they send you a card usually in the mail, your insurance card that you got to give to the dentist or the doctor or whatever. And now it's like no, now there's an app. And you put the app on your card, and the app has your digital ID on it. Like, okay, then what happens every time you're in checkout at the pharmacy? You go to open the app and it needs to be updated, and you don't have internet access because you're underground. And so I finally just took a screenshot of it, put it in a folder on my phone. But this is just it was fine the way it was in the first place, where I had an actual physical card in my wallet.
But are you one of these people who prints out a physical boarding pass when you go to the airport, for example?
Every single goddamn time.
I did not realize this.
I don't even believe you people that you're willing to leave it to the chance that your phone won't go dead, the internet won't cut out, you won't be able to find it. I can more easily find what's in my pocket than what's on my phone with all these apps I have to put on there. I probably sound like a cantankerous old man at one point.
I know.
Well, it's so easy. When you're in the line to check your bag or whatever, it says, would you like to reprint boarding pass? Always hit yes. Always have a physical boarding
pass. I can't believe, despite our age disparity in your favor, that you're adopting the Luddite position on boarding passes and so forth.
I guess. I am so... I feel this way so strongly. I think the other way to do it is just wrong. Everyone should have a physical boarding pass at all times.
Goodness, very unlibertarian view, but will survive.
Yes, indeed. All right, well, tell us what you think about the penny. Is anyone out there pining for the penny?
Where's the big penny lobby?
Where's Big Penny? If that's you, write to us or check in on the comments and tell us what we've missed. That does it for us today on Rising. We've been having just so much fun. There was a Lord of the Rings reference that went right over Niall's head, but I'm sure you missed it. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.